When you were a child, you walked into the ocean without asking anyone. You did not fill out a form. Nobody issued you a permit. No institution reviewed your application and determined that you were qualified to feel the water on your feet. You walked in because the ocean was there, and you were there, and the thought that permission might be required for this did not exist in you, because it had not yet been placed there. Somewhere between that morning and this one, something changed. Not in the ocean, in you. What follows is not a political argument. It is not left or right. It is not for the angry or against the comfortable. It is for anyone who has stood at a border, or a bank, or a government office, or a platform's terms of service, and felt beneath the frustration, beneath the paperwork, something they could not name. A quiet certainty that the arrangement was wrong. Not inconvenient, wrong. By the time this is over, you will be able to name it, and naming it will not make you feel better. It will make you feel something more useful than better. Here is what we are told. Here is the version that lives in textbooks and speeches and the opening statements of public inquiries. The story of the modern liberal democratic state is a story of progressive liberation from the divine right of kings, from slavery, from apartheid, from the silencing of women, from the criminalization of private life. Each generation inherited more rights than the last, the arc of history bending, as it was promised it would, toward justice. And the evidence for this version is not nothing. In 1900, a woman could not vote in most of the world. In 1950, a black American could not drink from the same fountain as a white one. In 1967, loving someone of a different race was a criminal offense in 17 American states. These things changed. The changes were real. The people who fought for them were real, and the courage it cost them was real. We regulate freedom, the argument goes, only to protect freedom. Speed limits exist so that your freedom to drive does not extinguish someone else's freedom to live. Licensing requirements exist to protect you from the incompetent. Surveillance exists to protect you from the dangerous. The state is a neutral referee, not a player. Its interest is the protection of your rights, not their limitation. This is a coherent story. It is internally consistent. It is taught in every school in the developed world, and if you grew up inside it, it feels like the air itself, not a story at all, but simply reality. Hold on to it. We will need it later. In 2019, a man named James Price was issued a fine in the United Kingdom for collecting rainwater. Not diverted water, not water taken from a reservoir. Rain, the water that fell from the sky onto the roof of his own property, which he directed into a container he owned in a garden he maintained. The relevant authorities cited the Water Industry Act 1991. The fine was eventually overturned on appeal, but the original fine was issued in good faith by an official who believed they were acting within a legitimate legal framework, which they were. There is a law that governs who owns the rain, not the reservoir, not the pipe, the rain. This is a small story. It barely made the news. And perhaps that is the most interesting thing about it. Not that it happened, but that it happened, and most people filed it under bureaucratic absurdity and moved on, because it did not fit inside the official story. Inside the official story, this is an error, a rule poorly applied or poorly written, not a signal, not a pattern. Anomalies are the official story's immune response. They are labeled exceptions, explained as isolated failures, and neutralized before they can become questions. This particular anomaly had a question hiding inside it. If someone owns the rain, who decided that, and when, and why did nobody ask you? Her name was Maria. She was 53 years old, born in the Philippines, a naturalized citizen of the United States for 19 years. She owned a small cleaning business in Sacramento, California. She had 7 employees. She paid taxes in 4 categories. She had a business license, a vehicle license, a food handler's certificate she did not need but had acquired anyway, and 3 separate liability insurance policies. In 2021, she attempted to open a second location. The process required 17 separate approvals from 9 different municipal, state, and federal bodies. The approvals were not sequential. Some could only be applied for once, others were granted, and some of those prerequisite approvals had waiting periods measured in months. The total elapsed time from initial application to first day of operation was 14 months. At no point during those 14 months was Maria doing anything illegal. She was not being investigated. She was not under suspicion. She had not violated any regulation. She was simply waiting for permission to work. I want you to sit with that for a moment. You see, a citizen, in a country whose founding document lists the pursuit of happiness as an inalienable right, waited 14 months for permission to pursue hers. And the system that made her wait was not designed by enemies, it was not imposed by conquerors, it was built incrementally by elected representatives at the request of existing businesses who preferred that Maria not be able to compete with them quite so quickly. She got there eventually. Most people do not. Most people look at the 14 months and decide it is not worth it, and that decision made privately, in a kitchen, at a table covered in paperwork, is never recorded anywhere as a freedom lost. It is recorded, if at all, as a business that was never started. Maria is not alone. She is a point in a pattern so large that its edges are difficult to see from inside it. In the United States, the Institute for Justice tracks occupational licensing, the requirement to obtain government permission before working in a given field. In 1950, approximately 5% of American workers required a government license to do their job. Today, that number exceeds 25%. Interior designers in Florida require more training hours for their license than emergency medical technicians. African hair braiders in some states must complete 1,500 hours of cosmetology school before they are legally permitted to touch a client's hair, cosmetology school that does not teach hair braiding. The stated purpose of each license is consumer protection. The documented effect of each license is the restriction of competition. The people who lobby hardest for licensing requirements in any given field are the people already licensed in that field. In the United Kingdom, the right to protest has required prior notification to police since 1986. Since 2022, police may impose conditions on any protest they determine likely to cause serious disruption, a threshold so broadly defined that its application is, in practice, discretionary. Between 2022 and 2024, 49 people were arrested in London for the act of standing in silence near a location the authorities preferred they avoid, standing in silence. Near a place, this required permission. The permission was denied. The people stood anyway. They were arrested. In Germany, a country with living memory of what happens when the state monitors its citizens too closely, the digital identity system introduced in 2023 links every citizen's online activity, financial transactions, and movement data into a single government-accessible profile. The stated purpose: fraud prevention and tax compliance. The actual capacity, a complete record of every permission-requiring activity undertaken by every citizen, cross-referenced and permanently stored. Each of these stories comes with an explanation. Each explanation is reasonable, and the explanations taken individually are not wrong. The problem is not any one of them. The problem is the pattern they form when you stop looking at them individually. The word permission is doing a great deal of work in this story, and I want to look at it directly for a moment. Permission implies a grantor, someone or something that holds the right you are seeking, and may choose to extend it to you or withhold it. When you ask for permission, you are acknowledging that the thing you want to do is not yours to do by default. You are acknowledging, in the act of asking, that sovereignty over the action belongs to someone else. Now consider the list: the right to work, the right to travel, the right to speak in public, the right to assemble, the right to collect rainwater, the right to open a business, the right to stand in silence near a building. Every item on that list was, at some point in living memory, assumed to require no permission at all. And somewhere between then and now, each one became permissioned, each one acquired a grantor, each grantor acquired a fee schedule, each fee schedule acquired an enforcement mechanism, and the enforcement mechanism acquired, at its far end, a penalty for non-compliance. The official story calls this regulation, but regulation is what you do to an activity that poses a risk to others. What happened here was different. What happened here was the insertion of a permission layer between a person and an activity that had never previously required one. That is not regulation. That is the conversion of a right into a product. And once a right becomes a product, the logic of the market applies to it. Products can be priced. Products can be made available only to those who can afford them. Products can be withdrawn when the supplier decides to withdraw them. Products come with terms and conditions. products can be revoked for breach of those conditions. The freedom you thought you had to work, to speak, to travel, to assemble, to collect the rain that falls on your roof, was not taken from you. That would have been too visible, too inflammatory. People have started revolutions over visible takings. Instead, it was repackaged. It was put inside a process, surrounded by a form, attached to a fee, subjected to an approval workflow, and handed back to you with a certificate that said you may now exercise this right you were always told was inherent. You paid for something you already owned. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that deserves its own silence, is that most people paid without question. Because by the time the system was fully assembled, nobody alive could remember when you didn't have to. If the official story is that freedom expanded, and the evidence is that rights became permissions, what does the world look like if we take the evidence seriously? It looks like this. What we call the administrative state is not primarily a mechanism for delivering services. It is primarily a mechanism for managing access. Its principal function is not provision, it is the gatekeeping of permission, and the gatekeeper, in every system ever built, extracts a toll. The philosopher Albert Hirschman described the three responses available to any person inside a deteriorating system: exit, voice, or loyalty. You can leave, you can complain, or you can stay and accept. The permission economy is distinguished from earlier forms of unfreedom by how systematically it has made exit impossible and voice ineffective. You cannot exit the requirement for a passport. You cannot exit the licensing regime of the jurisdiction you live in. You cannot exit the terms of service of the platforms through which all modern speech flows. You cannot exit the financial system through which all modern commerce moves. And if you try to build alternatives to any of these things, if you try to create a currency that does not require a bank, or a communication platform that does not require a corporation, or a transport network that does not require a state, the first thing that happens is the issuance of a requirement for permission. Exit is the one freedom they have not yet fully permissioned. They are working on it. Here is the intelligent objection. I want to give it its full weight, because it deserves to be answered rather than dismissed. The objection is this: some of what you're describing as the conversion of rights to permissions is simply the price of civilization. Complex societies require coordination, requires rules, rules require enforcement, and enforcement requires, at some level, the ability to restrict behavior that violates the rules. The person who says they have a right to drive without a license has a point in principle and is a menace in practice. The construction of permission systems is not a conspiracy, it is what modern governance looks like. This is correct, as far as it goes. The question is not whether rules are necessary. The question is who writes the rules, who benefits from the rules, and who bears the cost when the rules expand beyond their stated purpose. The answer to all three questions in the permission economy is the same entity. The rules are written by existing incumbents through lobbying, regulatory capture, and the revolving door between industry and the agencies that govern it. The incumbents benefit from rules that raise the cost of entry for competitors, and the cost is borne by everyone who wants to enter a market, exercise a right, or pursue an activity that someone with access to the rule-writing process has decided to make expensive. This is not a conspiracy. It requires no secret meetings. It requires only that people with shared interests act on those interests, which human beings do reliably, without requiring instruction. The licensing board does not convene to keep Maria out. It convenes to protect standards. Maria's exclusion is simply the residue of that protection, accumulated, compounded, and never cleaned up, because the people with the power to clean it up benefit from its persistence. The absence of malice does not require the presence of accident. There is a concept in economics called rent-seeking. It describes the practice of extracting wealth from an existing arrangement, rather than creating new wealth through production or innovation. A classic rent-seeker does not build a better road, they build a toll booth on the existing road. The road stays the same, the traveler pays more, the rent-seeker collects the difference. The permission economy is rent-seeking applied to rights. The rights were already there. They were not created by the permission system, they pre-existed it. What the permission system created was the mechanism for extracting value from them. The application fee, the license fee, the compliance cost, the legal cost, the time cost, the cost of failure when the application is rejected, and the process must begin again. The right to travel did not become more valuable when passports were introduced. It became more expensive. The right to work did not become more valuable when occupational licenses were introduced. It became more expensive. The right to speak did not become more valuable when platform verification, content moderation systems, and digital ID proposals were introduced. It became more contingent, and here is the revelation that the rest of this documentary rests on. The people who collect the rent from permissioned rights have no interest in the rights themselves. They have an interest in the permission layer, which means they have an interest, structural, financial, and institutional, in expanding the number of things that require permission. The permission economy is not a static condition, it is a growth industry, and it has been growing consistently for your entire life. I want to take a step back from the politics of this for a moment, because I think the most important thing about the permission economy is not what it does to your wallet, or your schedule, or your small business application. Those are the visible effects. The invisible effect is what it does to how you think about yourself. When you are required to apply for permission to do something, you enter a particular psychological posture. You become in that moment a petitioner, and the petitioner's psychology is very different from the psychology of someone who knows they are exercising a right. The person exercising a right is sovereign. They move with the quiet assurance of someone on their own ground. They may be challenged, and they may have to defend themselves, but the burden of justification sits with the challenger, not with them. The petitioner is not sovereign. The petitioner is in the supplicant position, presenting themselves, demonstrating their qualifications, making their case, waiting for judgment. The burden of justification sits with them. They must prove they deserve the thing they are asking for. Now consider what happens when an entire generation grows up in a world where the petitioner's posture is the only one they have ever been taught. They do not know they are petitioners. They think this is simply what it means to live in a society. They think the queue, and the form, and the fee, and the waiting period, and the approval workflow, they think this is normal. Not because it is normal, because it is all they have ever seen. The philosopher Michel Foucault spent a great deal of his life asking a question that most philosophers had avoided. Not how is power imposed on people, but how do people come to impose power on themselves? His answer, arrived at through the study of prisons, hospitals, schools, and asylums, was that the most durable form of power is the kind that does not need an enforcer, the kind that produces inside the governed the instinct to govern themselves. He called this normalization, the process by which an arrangement that serves the interests of some becomes perceived as simply the natural order of things by everyone. The permission economy has been normalized. Not by force, not by propaganda, by time, by the slow accumulation of requirements so gradual that no single generation experienced a dramatic change, only a slightly more complicated world than the one their parents described, which they assumed was the natural price of modernity. You did not notice the cage being built, because each bar was installed when you were not watching. And the most disturbing implication of this is not that you're in a cage. It is that you have spent your adult life seeking permission for things you were born entitled to, and you have called this participation. Let us be specific about the money, because money is where abstraction becomes undeniable. In the United States, the combined annual cost of federal regulatory compliance, the cost of applying for permits, maintaining licenses, filing required disclosures, retaining compliance officers, and paying the fines when requirements are imperfectly met, was estimated by the Competitive Enterprise Institute at $1.9 trillion in 2022. That is not the cost of taxes, that is the cost of permission, of the time, money, and labor consumed simply by the act of seeking approval to do things that do not require approval in principle. $1.9 trillion annually, extracted not from the economy's productive capacity, but from the friction between people and the things they were trying to do. And who collects it? Not the state, primarily. The state collects some of it in application fees, licensing fees, filing fees, but the larger portion goes to the compliance industry, the lawyers, accountants, consultants, and specialist firms that exist not to produce anything, but to navigate the permission system on behalf of those who can afford to hire them. The people who cannot afford to hire them navigate it alone. They take longer, they make more mistakes. Their applications are rejected more often, their appeals are filed less effectively, their rights are exercised, in practice, less fully. The permission economy is a regressive tax on access. The wealthy pay it easily, they hire the navigator. The poor pay it in time, in failure, and in the quiet abandonment of things they wanted to do, but decided were not worth the cost of asking. In 2020, a Harvard study examined the relationship between occupational licensing requirements and income inequality across American states. The finding was not subtle. States with more extensive licensing regimes had measurably higher income inequality than states with lighter ones, not because licensing requirements prevented poor people from earning money, because they prevented poor people from competing with the people who wrote the licensing requirements. The license is not a floor, it is a ceiling placed precisely at the height of the existing players, and placed there, unmistakably, by the existing players. Here is where the story becomes contemporary. Here is where the permission economy stops being a story about the past and becomes a story about the next 10 years. Digital identity. The European Union's digital identity wallet, mandated across all member states by 2026, will create a single government-issued credential linking each citizen's identity to their financial activity, healthcare records, travel history, and digital communications. The stated purpose is convenience. One credential instead of many. The architecture is also incidentally a single point at which all of a citizen's permissioned activities can be monitored, conditionally approved or suspended. China's social credit system, the example most frequently cited in this context, is not an anomaly, it is a prototype. Not because Western governments are secretly plotting to replicate it, but because the infrastructure required to replicate it is being built for other reasons, and once infrastructure exists, the uses it enables become available. A permission system that operates digitally, at scale, with real-time verification, does not need to be weaponized to produce a chilling effect. The awareness that permission can be withdrawn, that your credential can be flagged, that your access can be suspended, that your right to transact, travel, or speak can be made contingent, is sufficient to alter behavior without a single enforcement action. This is what Foucault's prison guard understood. You do not need to watch everyone. You need only to be in a position where everyone knows they could be watched. The watching is unnecessary once the possibility of it has been established. The permission economy is not moving toward this architecture. It is arriving. The speech question deserves its own examination because it is the most contested and because the stakes of getting it wrong in either direction are the highest. The argument for platform content moderation is legitimate. Unmoderated speech at scale produces measurable harm. The documented effects of coordinated harassment, radicalization pipelines, and algorithmic amplification of outrage are real. Someone must decide what is acceptable on a platform used by 3 billion people. The argument against centralized speech permissioning is equally legitimate. Whoever decides what speech is acceptable has, by definition, the power to suppress speech they find inconvenient, and that power has never, in any historical context, been held by an entity that did not eventually use it in its own interest. I'm here to observe that the resolution currently being implemented across every major platform, through every government's content regulation framework, is consistently in the direction of more permissioning rather than less, that each new content moderation system has more categories, more automated enforcement, and less human review than the one before it, and that the entities writing the rules are, consistently, the entities with the largest existing audiences and the greatest interest in ensuring that those audiences remain captive. The permission to speak is being concentrated, gradually, with excellent stated reasons. Excellent stated reasons are the method of the permission economy. They always have been. Here is the paradox, stated as plainly as I can state it. The permission economy was built by democratic governments in democratic countries through democratic processes, at the request of democratically elected representatives in response to the demands of democratic constituencies. The permission economy was not imposed, it was voted for, not by malicious people, by people who wanted their children's food to be safe, by people who wanted to be sure their doctor was qualified, by people who had been burned by unscrupulous financial advisors and wanted protection, by people who had watched their neighborhood change rapidly and wanted some mechanism for slowing things down, by people with real grievances and legitimate fears who asked their representatives to do something and whose representatives did something reliably by adding a requirement for permission. The citizens who built the cage believed they were building a shelter. And here is the other side of the paradox, the correct response, the dismantling of excessive permission requirements, the reduction of the license burden, the return of assumed rights to their original status as rights rather than products, is politically almost impossible to accomplish, because every permission requirement has a constituency. Every license has a holder who will mobilize against its removal. Every regulatory framework has an industry that depends on it. Dismantling the permission economy requires taking something away from people who have built their economic security around having it, and no democratic government that wishes to remain in power will do that efficiently or at scale. So, we built it democratically, and we cannot dismantle it democratically. I'm not going to tell you what to do with that. I'm going to tell you that the people who designed the system knew this, and that they designed it knowing it. Go back to the child walking into the ocean. I want to revise something I said at the beginning. I said that something changed between that morning and this one, that somewhere in the passage from childhood to adulthood, the permission requirement was placed in you. That is not quite right. Or rather, it is right about the mechanism and wrong about the direction. The permission requirement was not placed in you. It was not installed by an external authority. What happened was more intimate than that, and more devastating. You placed it in yourself. The child who walked into the ocean did not know that freedom was something that could be owned by someone else. That knowledge was acquired, and once acquired, once you understood that the right to do a thing could be held by an external party and conditionally extended to you, the knowledge could not be undone. The possibility of permission had entered your model of the world, and once a possibility exists in the model, the mind begins to apply it. This is how normalization works at the individual level, not through force, through the adoption, quiet, gradual, largely unconscious, of the permission posture as the default orientation toward action. And here is what that adoption costs, beyond the fees and the forms and the time. It costs initiative. The person in the permission posture waits for approval before moving. The person who knows their rights moves first and defends them if challenged. These are not the same person. They do not produce the same economy, the same culture, the same politics, or the same civilization. One of the most consistent findings in the study of entrepreneurship is that the single greatest predictor of whether someone starts a business is whether they believe they are the kind of person who starts businesses, not capital, not education, not opportunity, belief in their own default legitimacy. The permission economy does not just make it harder to start a business, it teaches people across a lifetime of permission seeking that acting is something you do after approval, not before it. It produces as its deepest and least visible output a population that has learned to ask. A population that has learned to ask is a population that has learned not to act, and a population that does not act, that waits, applies, appeals, reapplies, and finally either receives permission or gives up, is, in the most precise political sense of the word, governed, not by fear, not by force. By the internalized certainty that acting without permission is the wrong way to be in the world. The opening metaphor was not about the ocean. It was about that certainty, and when it arrived in you, and now that you know when it arrived, you know that it was not always there, which means it is not inherent, which means it can be examined, which means it can be refused. Maria finished the 14 months. She opened the second location. It has been operating for 3 years. She has 9 employees now. Her first location still operates. She pays more in taxes than she did when we began this story, which she considers a reasonable arrangement. I want to return to her for a moment, not because her story ended well, but because of something that happened during those 14 months that I did not mention the first time. 6 months in, with 8 approvals received and 9 still pending, her lawyer advised her that one of the pending approvals, a zoning variance, was extremely unlikely to be granted. The variance was being opposed by a competitor whose premises were 3 blocks away. The competitor had submitted a formal objection citing community character concerns, which is the language the process uses when the actual concern is competition. Maria's lawyer advised her to engage a consultant who specialized in navigating zoning variance objections. The consultant charged $4,200. The variance was granted 6 weeks later. She paid $4,200 for the right to operate a cleaning business in a jurisdiction where cleaning businesses are legal, welcomed, and needed. She paid it to a consultant whose expertise was not in cleaning, or in business, or in community development, whose expertise was specifically and only in navigating a system that charges people to exercise rights they were told were inherent. She paid without bitterness, because this is simply what you do, because everyone who had ever opened a business had told her, you will need a consultant, because in the permission economy the consultant is not an anomaly, the consultant is the product. Maria is not a cautionary tale. She succeeded. The system worked, in the sense that it produced the outcome it was supposed to produce, a licensed, compliant, tax-paying business contributing to the economy of Sacramento. What the system also produced, at no extra charge, was the certainty installed in Maria and in everyone who watched her, and in everyone who heard her story and decided not to try, that freedom is something you apply for. She did not notice this part. She was too busy running her business. That is perhaps the most elegant thing about the permission economy. The people it works on are too busy navigating it to examine it. The child at the ocean did not need to be taught that the water was there for her. She walked in because walking in was the obvious, natural, unquestioned thing to do. The question of permission did not occur to her. Not because she was too young to understand rules, because she was still young enough to understand rights. Somewhere in the development of every modern citizen, that understanding is replaced by a different one, not through a single event, not through any teachable moment, through 10,000 small encounters with systems that process you, require something from you, and return you to your life slightly more accustomed to being processed. The question is not whether this can be stopped. The machinery is too large, too entrenched, too democratically defended by those who benefit from it for any individual act to stop it. The question, the one I'm going to leave you with, because I do not have an answer that will fit inside the time we have, is what you do with the knowing. The knowing that the permission posture was learned, not born, that the certainty that acting without prior approval is the wrong way to be in the world was installed, not inherited. That the freedom you feel you're exercising when you successfully navigate a permission system is not the same thing as the freedom you had before the permission system existed. You can know this and continue to navigate the system. Most people will. The system is real and non-compliance has real consequences, and knowing the nature of a cage does not open it. But knowing the nature of a cage does change what you are. It changes the way you stand inside it. It changes what you look for. It changes what you refuse to internalize as natural when it is in fact constructed. Maria's second location opens every morning at 7. She does not think about permission systems when she turns the key. She thinks about her 9 employees and her clients and the day ahead of her. She is free in the ways that are available to her. The question is whether the ways that are available to her are the same ones she was born with, and the question after that, the one that keeps moving, the one that does not resolve, is who decided they were.
Velanthra, the veil over what is dark,